What's the cruelest thing anyone has ever accused you of? For me, it was the morning I found myself 8 months pregnant, wrists cuffed to a hospital bed, my veins burning with panic while armed officers circled like vultures. They weren't after a confession of theft or fraud. They wanted me to admit I was selling my unborn child. 2 weeks earlier, life had felt ordinary, even joyful. At my baby shower, surrounded by pastel balloons and the clinking of glasses, my husband and I had finally revealed the name we had chosen. Richard. Richard, to honour my grandfather. Patrick, after my husband's brother who never made it home from Afghanistan. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration, but instead, it cracked something open. I still see Nancy's face, my sister-in-law, when she heard the name. A flicker of recognition, then suspicion. She dragged me into the kitchen, her voice a sharp whisper. "Where did you get that name? Who told you?" I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, and showed her the framed photos of my grandfather and Patrick's brother. "It's family," I said. "It has meaning." But Nancy's eyes narrowed as though I had just confessed to a crime. "No. How did you know?" She left the party without tasting the cake. That night, she vanished, blocking us on every platform, refusing calls. We chalked it up to some private turmoil. Families fracture over less, and then came the pounding at our door at 5 a.m. 2 officers, guns drawn, cold commands. In an instant, our home became a crime scene. My husband was yanked away in cuffs, his face pale with disbelief, and I was swept into a nightmare I hadn't earned. Nancy, it turned out, had reported us to the Crimes Against Children unit. Her accusation? That we were trafficking our own baby under a stolen identity, that we were plotting to sell him, Richard, to the highest bidder. At the hospital, the cuffs bit into my swollen wrists. Officer Donald stationed himself in the corner, his sidearm a constant threat. He dropped a folder onto the tray table with a thunderous crack. "We know everything," he said, eyes glittering with contempt. "Richard, 6 years old, Michigan. You've been obsessed with this boy. Your sister-in-law documented it all." "I don't know any child by that name," I gasped, but my words were treated like lies before they left my mouth. "Shut up." He flipped through Facebook screenshots, baby registry gifts, posts about duplicate items, marketplace codes, twin babies, buyers. "You think we don't understand what this means?" My chest tightened. The blood pressure machine shrieked. A nurse hurried in, her voice alarmed. "She's at 180 over 120. This kind of stress could—" "She's faking," Donald cut her off coldly. "They all fake." When Officer Paul arrived with Child Protective Services, the verdict was delivered like a death sentence. "Your baby will be taken at birth. You'll never see him. That's if you don't get life without parole first," I begged, voice cracking. "Nancy is lying. Those were gifts. Please." Paul didn't blink. "Your husband already confessed. Said it was all your idea." The words gutted me. My stomach seized in violent pain, a sharp tearing inside, warmth spreading between my legs. "Something's wrong," I gasped. "The baby—" "Convenient timing," Donald sneered. "Sit still." The sheets beneath me turned crimson. The nurse's gasp cut through the chaos. "She's hemorrhaging! Placental abruption! Get Dr. Kevin now!" "She's faking," Donald repeated, but his voice faltered as blood pooled on the bed. Dr. Kevin burst into the room, his face blanching. "Jesus Christ! How long has she been bleeding?" 5 minutes, maybe 10, the nurse cried. "They wouldn't let me." "If we don't act immediately, we'll lose them both," Kevin snapped, reaching for instruments. But Donald stepped in front of the door, blocking the exit like a prison guard. "She's in custody. She stays here." "Then, you're signing their death certificates," Kevin shot back, voice razor sharp. Donald raised his phone with infuriating calm. Protocol is protocol. I'll call for authorization. There's no time, the doctor roared. While Donald left a voicemail, I writhed, vision blurring. A nurse slammed fluids into my veins. Another rushed in with blood bags. The head nurse pulled up hospital regulations on her tablet, voice trembling but firm. Custody transfers to medical authority during surgical emergencies. Page 47, Section 3. Donald snatched the device, scanning the text with disdain. This looks fake. Another contraction ripped through me. My scream filled the room, echoing off sterile walls. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't Nancy who wanted me destroyed. It was everyone who believed her. Could be edited, Donald muttered when the head nurse shoved the hospital policy in his face. Anybody could have doctored this. Edited? Dr. Kevin's voice cracked like thunder. It's from the federal website. His fury finally pierced the officer's arrogance, and with a barked order, the nurses began rushing me down the corridor, wheels squealing against tile. Officers jogged alongside the gurney, like I was some cartel kingpin staging an escape. Watch for her to bolt, Donald warned Paul. They use accomplices sometimes, disguised as medical staff. She's hemorrhaging, damn it, Kevin roared, shoving through the surgical doors. She can't run anywhere. She's barely clinging to consciousness. The world tilted and blurred. Pre-op lights burned holes in my eyes. Voices swam together. The anesthesiologist froze when he saw the cuffs on my wrists. Absolutely not. These come off for surgery. She's a flight risk, Donald barked. The anesthesiologist stared at my distended belly, the blood-stained sheet beneath me. She's 8 months pregnant. She's bleeding out. She'll be unconscious in seconds. Where exactly is she going to run? His voice dropped into deadly calm. You've kept her blood pressure at stroke levels this entire time. Are you trying to kill her? Donald didn't flinch. One officer stays in the OR. I need visual confirmation. She doesn't leave this room. The anesthesiologist snapped his fingers for security. Get the hospital administrator down here. Now! We've got federal interference with emergency medical treatment. Moments later, the administrator appeared. She took one look at me, ashen, trembling, my gown soaked in red, and her face hardened. You can stand outside the operating theatre, she told the officers, voice like steel. Or I'll be on the phone to the Office of Professional Responsibility, reporting you for attempted murder by medical obstruction. For the first time, Donald hesitated. His finger jabbed toward me. When she wakes up, if she wakes up, we're charging her with everything. The baby goes straight to CPS, no contact. The lights exploded into black. When I woke, my body felt flayed open, every nerve raw. Fire radiated from my abdomen where they had cut me. My throat burned like glass from the breathing tube. The recovery room was too bright, too white, too wrong. A nurse's face swam into view. I tried to shape the only word that mattered, rasping through a torn voice. Baby. Her eyes softened, but the relief there was tangled with grief. He's alive, she whispered, but very small. He's in the NICU. Joy shot through me, followed by an unbearable weight. I tried to sit up, but pain ripped me apart, forcing me back. The nurse's hand pressed gently on my shoulder. You can't see him, she said, voice trembling. CPS has custody. There's a no-contact order. The words didn't compute. My son was breathing, his heart was beating, and yet he was already stolen. The nurse leaned closer as she adjusted my IV, her expression darting toward the door. I documented everything, she murmured. They delayed your surgery for nearly 20 minutes while you were bleeding out. I wrote it all. It's in your file. Her hand slipped a folded scrap of paper beneath my blanket, fingers brushing mine. That's my number. If you need testimony, if you fight this, I'll stand. What they did was criminal. Then she straightened abruptly, eyes flicking toward approaching footsteps, and moved away, as if nothing had happened. A CPS worker entered with a thick folder and a counterfeit smile that curdled my blood. She introduced herself, all syrup and sharp edges, and began sliding papers across my tray. "Just routine paperwork about the baby's care," she said breezily. I tried to focus on the words. "What exactly do they say?" "Oh, standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. Just sign here and we'll take care of everything." Something inside me stiffened. Not without a lawyer. The mask cracked instantly. Her smile vanished, replaced by venom. "Refusal to cooperate will be documented, used in court to prove you don't care about your child's well-being." She slammed the folder onto my table and stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gavel blows. Hours blurred. Painkillers, vitals, the beep of machines keeping me tethered to life. Then came footsteps I knew, uneven and dragging. My husband filled the doorway. My breath caught at the sight of him. Left eye swollen shut, a purple bruise blooming across his face, right wrist wrapped in a brace. His shoulders slumped, his hair dishevelled, as though the weight of a decade had been forced onto him overnight. He stumbled to my side, collapsed into my arms, and we clung to each other in a silence so raw it was louder than screams. His tears wet my gown as he whispered brokenly, "They finally released me. Bail. My brother posted it. They said I confessed. I didn't. I swear to you, I never confessed." He pulled back just enough for me to see the ruin in his face. "They beat me in interrogation. Over and over. I wouldn't say it. So, Paul, he lied. He lied." I pressed my forehead against his, both of us shaking, both of us drowning in a grief too vast to name. And then the door opened again. A uniformed officer stepped inside, face expressionless. "I'm here to enforce the no-contact order." My husband blinked at the officer in confusion, his voice raw. The order was about the baby, not us. The officer's face didn't flicker. "The order covers all parties. You leave now, or you'll be arrested again for violation." A shadow of defeat crossed my husband's face. He bent, pressed his lips to my forehead and whispered, "I love you. I'll fix this. Somehow." Then he was gone, escorted out like a criminal, leaving me in that sterile room with nothing but the smell of antiseptic and the echo of his absence. Alone again. Later, the hospital social worker found me sobbing into my pillow. She sat gently on the edge of the bed, her voice low and steady, like someone talking a jumper down from the ledge. She explained that I qualified for legal aid now that my husband had been suspended from work. Suspended, another word that cut into me like a blade. Our lives had been paused, dismantled, all because of Nancy's madness. The social worker helped me dial from the hospital phone. Mine had been taken as evidence, as if motherhood could be catalogued and boxed up. The lawyer on the other end sounded young, nervous, like she was still learning how to steady her voice in court. But she promised to file an emergency motion for NICU visitation. "It could take a few days," she said, "but we'll try." 2 days later, I was discharged, though I could barely stand upright. A nurse wheeled me to the hospital doors where my husband's brother waited. My husband couldn't come, couldn't even brush my hand without risking prison. The drive home was a silent punishment, punctured only by my involuntary gasps whenever the car hit a bump that tore through my C-section wound. Walking into our house felt like stepping into a mausoleum. Everything was just as it had been the morning the officers arrived, except now it all felt wrong, emptied of its promise. The nursery door stood ajar, and from the hall I could see the crib, the little onesies hanging neatly, the rocking chair waiting. I couldn't cross the threshold. I couldn't even breathe near it. I closed the door softly, like sealing a coffin. I haven't opened it since. The next morning, I woke with my chest swollen, searing as if it might burst. My milk had come in. My body was ready to feed a child who wasn't there. I staggered into the shower, hot water pouring over me, and tried to relieve the pressure with my hands. Milk trickled down the drain while sobs ripped from my throat so violently that I vomited, clutching my incision to keep myself from splitting apart. Pain within pain. What had Nancy really convinced herself of? At that baby shower, her relentless whisper, "But how did you know?" echoed now like a curse. She must have believed she'd uncovered some sinister conspiracy. Maybe Donald's Facebook evidence fed into her delusion. Maybe she needed it to be true. But why me? Why us? That became my rhythm. Every few hours, crying in the shower, body producing food for a child I wasn't allowed to feed. 3 days after I came home, my lawyer called. The emergency hearing would happen by video since I was still too weak to travel. I sat at the kitchen table in front of my laptop, hands trembling as the judge reviewed my case. The prosecutor painted me as a danger, a flight risk, a mother who couldn't be trusted. My lawyer fought back, reminding the court that I had nearly died giving birth, that I had no criminal record, that there was no proof beyond the poisoned words of a woman unraveling. After 20 excruciating minutes, the judge issued his decision. I would be allowed 1 hour of supervised visitation in the NICU each day. The no-contact order with my husband remained. Temporary measures, the judge said. For the child's safety, temporary. The word felt like a prison sentence with no release date. The next morning, I stitched myself together with painkillers and determination. I couldn't drive, so I took 3 buses to the hospital, every jolt of the ride gnawing at my incision until I thought I'd scream. At the NICU entrance, a CPS worker and a security guard waited like sentries. They searched my bag, patted me down, emptied my pockets as if I might smuggle contraband instead of love. The CPS worker shadowed me into the NICU, clipboard ready, eyes sharp, and then my son. Richard lay in his incubator, a fragile weight of 4 pounds, his skin translucent, tubes threaded into him like veins borrowed from machines. His tiny chest heaved with effort, each breath a battle. When the nurse placed him against my chest, he was so light I thought I might shatter him by existing. His warmth soaked into me, his heart beat like a tiny drum trying to keep time with mine. I breathed him in, memorized the shape of his fingers, the curl of his lips. The CPS worker scribbled on her clipboard, noting every glance, every tremor, as though she could quantify love on paper. But none of that mattered. In that moment, all I knew was this: he was alive. He was mine. And I would burn the world before I let them take him forever. The CPS worker's phone rang, and she stepped out of the NICU to take the call. The nurse seized the moment, leaning close, her eyes flicking to the door. "He hasn't stopped crying since birth," she whispered. "Won't feed for anyone. We've all been worried. But the second you touched him..." She glanced at Richard, now quiet against my chest, his tiny breaths evening out. He calmed instantly, his oxygen leveled, his heart rate slowed. "He knows you. I'll write it all in his chart before she comes back." That afternoon, the hospital phone rang, my only tether since they'd stripped me of my cell. My mother-in-law's voice came through, jagged with sobs, words tumbling until I could barely catch them. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry for what Nancy's done. We don't know how to stop her." Then she said something that froze my blood. Nancy had miscarried 4 years ago, 5 months along. She'd already chosen the name, Richard. She'd painted the nursery, folded the tiny clothes, planned for the baby who never came. My mother-in-law confessed Nancy had never sought help, had buried the grief, locked it inside like a secret tumour. And suddenly, It all made sense. Nancy at the baby shower, her face twisting when we revealed the name. The way she demanded, "How did you know?" She hadn't heard Richard as a coincidence. She'd heard it as theft, an omen that we were somehow stealing the child she lost. Her unresolved grief had metastasized into delusion. In her mind, we weren't preparing for our son. We were conspiring to sell hers. I tried explaining this to the CPS worker, my voice shaking. She didn't even blink. Doesn't matter what Nancy's issues are. Our concern is the child in your custody. 3 days later, our lawyer filed motions with Nancy's medical records, her miscarriage documented, her social media posts mourning baby Richard. Proof that her obsession was rooted in trauma. Proof we were victims of her madness. The prosecutor barely looked at it. Doesn't matter. We investigate everything when kids are involved. Then came the bills. $18,000 for the emergency surgery that saved me. $12,000 for the NICU so far. Insurance refused to pay. The letter was blunt. If found guilty of trafficking, coverage is void. We had no income. My husband had been suspended. Each day, new envelopes arrived, thicker, heavier, like weights piling on my chest, and yet the system rewarded cruelty. Officer Donald, who had blocked my care while I bled, was shuffled to desk duty pending review. Officer Paul, the one who lied about my husband confessing, was promoted to sergeant. The nurse who documented the truth, her hours were slashed to 2 shifts a week. Budget cuts, they claimed. We all knew better. Then, another blow. A letter from Nancy's attorney. She was petitioning for grandparent rights. She claimed it was cruel to deny her contact with Richard, as if her delusion gave her legal claim to my child. Our lawyer called it insane, but warned we'd have to fight it. Another battle we couldn't afford. During my next NICU visit, Richard was in my arms when his monitor screamed. His tiny body stiffened, then stilled. His lips turned dusky blue. He wasn't breathing. The CPS worker froze, clipboard dangling uselessly. Instinct took over. I flipped him onto his stomach, delivered 5 sharp back blows just as they'd taught us in class. Nothing. His body stayed limp. I flipped him back, checked for breath. None. Another round. 5 more blows, harder now, panic rising like fire. Still nothing. "Do something!" I screamed at the CPS worker. She just stared, pale and useless. On the 3rd round, Richard coughed, wet, desperate, and then wailed. Relief ripped through me so violently I nearly collapsed. Nurses stormed in, whisked him away to check his vitals. The CPS worker's pen scratched across her form. She didn't write that I'd saved his life. She wrote that I'd been aggressive, that I'd violated supervision rules, that I'd performed unnecessary medical procedures without permission. Because of her report, my visits were slashed to 30 minutes. And now 2 supervisors hovered, watching me like a criminal. 1 week later, a text appeared from an unfamiliar number. My husband. Borrowed phone. 1 desperate line. Meet me. Grocery store lot. We both knew it was against the order. We both knew the risk. But I didn't care. I went. When I slid into his car, we didn't speak. We just clung to each other, tears soaking into fabric, hearts breaking in sync. He looked skeletal, 20 pounds gone, dark hollows carved under his eyes, and for 5 stolen minutes, we were human again. In the car, my husband clutched my hands like they were the last thing tethering him to this world. His voice cracked with guilt. "I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I should have protected him." I told him about Richard, the way his tiny chest had stopped rising, the way I'd brought him back, and how they punished me for saving his life. His jaw clenched, tears brimming, but before he could answer, a sharp flash lit up the inside of the car. We both turned. Our neighbour stood in the next space, phone raised, snapping photos through the glass. Her face was smug, righteous, like she'd caught two criminals instead of two shattered parents. She'd already dialed the police before we even registered what was happening. Panic shot through me. My husband threw the car into gear, tires squealing, while I bolted toward my own vehicle. We split in opposite directions, hearts in our throats. An hour later, squad cars rolled up to the house. They searched, questioned, prowled like wolves. But my husband wasn't there. No arrest this time. A small mercy. 2 days later, my lawyer called, her voice vibrating with energy. "I found something," she said, and my hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the receiver. She dug into Officer Donald's history and uncovered 6 prior complaints, excessive force, false arrests, all buried by the department. Not one disciplinary action. She was filing a motion to admit them as evidence, proof of a pattern. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred in my chest. The next morning, hope died again. I was cradling Richard during my 30-minute slot when chaos erupted in the hallway. A woman's scream, ragged and wild, cut through the NICU glass. "Nancy, I know she stole him. That's my baby. Let me in. Let me see him." The CPS supervisor bolted toward the doors as Nancy barreled past 2 nurses, hair wild, eyes feral, shrieking. Security sprinted from both directions, while other parents grabbed their fragile infants, pressing them tight against their chests, faces pale with terror. Nancy pounded on the locked NICU entrance, fists slamming like hammers. The glass shook. Richard startled in my arms, monitors shrieking as his oxygen plummeted. His breathing became ragged, desperate. The nurse ripped him from me, fumbling to adjust his tube. Through the barrier, I watched as Nancy clawed at the door until guards dragged her away, still screaming. One mother clutched her premature twins so tightly she sobbed as though they might vanish. When the NICU settled again, something inside me had fractured further. The stress was killing me too. My milk dwindled no matter what I did. Water, supplements, pumping until I cried. The nurses began supplementing Richard with formula. I caught the CPS worker jotting notes. Mother unable to provide sufficient nutrition. A new mark against me. 3 weeks after his traumatic birth, Richard developed a heart murmur. Each day it grew worse until the cardiologist said what I dreaded. Immediate surgery was his only chance. They let me sit in the waiting room, but when I reached for consent papers, there were none. CPS had custody. I watched a stranger, a social worker I'd never seen, sign away my baby's body for the scalpel. The surgery lasted 4 hours. I paced like a caged animal, fueled by bitter coffee and the sound of other families receiving relief, while I was left gnawed by silence. The board kept his name under inoperation. I stared until the letters blurred. Finally, the surgeon emerged, eyes sunken, sweat streaking his temples. "He made it," he said, voice heavy. But his heart stopped twice. We had to resuscitate him both times. The world tilted. My legs buckled and I woke later in a hospital bed, IV dripping into my veins. A doctor explained I'd collapsed from dehydration and exhaustion, my body buckling after weeks of no food, no sleep, only adrenaline and grief. While I lay there, barely awake, a friend who worked at the hospital texted me in secret. Security had caught Nancy in the parking garage, dressed in stolen scrubs, trying to sneak in through the employee entrance to reach the NICU. They arrested her for trespassing and attempted unauthorized entry. But when the file reached the prosecutor's office, they declined charges. "She needs treatment, not jail," they said. Treatment, not jail. Meanwhile, I was cuffed, accused, monitored, stripped of my child. When my lawyer called again, her voice shook with fury. She'd finally gotten hold of the original police report, the one filed the morning Nancy made her complaint. Someone had altered it, after the fact, added evidence, codes, trafficking references, fabricated details that weren't in the original. Lies written in black ink to damn us. The system had rewritten the story to make us monsters. Nancy sneaking into the NICU in stolen scrubs, dress for the job you want, twisted into a nightmare. She had already mastered the art of invention, but this was obsession made flesh. And then came the proof that nearly broke the case open. The electronic records carried a shadow no one had expected. Timestamp metadata showing Officer Donald had altered the report 3 days after my emergency surgery. He had gone back, falsified official documents, padding them with fabricated codes and trafficking references to make his story bulletproof. Our lawyer's voice shook with controlled fury when she told me, "We're preparing criminal charges against Donald himself. He won't walk away from this." But just as momentum swung in our favour, the prosecutor called. His voice was smooth, almost casual, as though he were doing me a favour. An offer: plead guilty to misdemeanour child endangerment. Accept 2 years probation. In return, all other charges dropped, and I could regain custody of Richard in 6 months. "It's extortion," my lawyer spat. "They know their case is unravelling and want to save face. But," her pause was heavy, "it would be the fastest way to get your son back." The choice seared like acid. But I refused. No, I will not admit to something I didn't do. We chose a name for our baby. That's all. We are not guilty. That night, my husband called from a borrowed phone, voice ragged. When I told him about the deal, his silence lasted too long. Then, "We should take it. 6 months is better than years of fighting. He'd be home with us." I felt something in me snap. "So, we lie? We confess to a crime we didn't commit? You're giving up. And you're being stubborn," he shouted, pain turning into anger. "This isn't about pride. It's about getting our son back alive." It was our first real fight since the nightmare began. I hung up shaking, torn between rage and grief. The next morning, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. A woman's voice introduced herself as a reporter. "I've gotten a tip from inside the hospital," she said, "about your case, about CPS and the police. I want to hear your side. Fear 1. I can't comment on ongoing legal proceedings." I hung up. 3 days later, the article exploded across the news site anyway, local. Couple accused of selling unborn baby. Our faces, our names, our address. The headline was cruel, but the comments were worse. Strangers posted our phone numbers, photographs of our house. My voicemail filled with bile, men describing in detail how they would make us pay. Women sobbing that baby sellers didn't deserve to breathe. Threats of fire, knives, blood. I changed my number. Hours later, the calls resumed. Changed again. 3 times in 1 week until we finally went unlisted. My husband endured the same at the friend's house where he was hiding, his phone vibrating like a live grenade day and night. 4 days after the article, I woke to fists pounding the front door. No one stood on the porch when I looked through the peephole. But outside, red dripped fresh down the garage door. Huge letters, 3 feet tall, bleeding down onto the driveway. Baby killers, the paint stank of gasoline and rage. I called the police. An officer arrived, shrugged, and leaned against his car. "Unless you have video, there's nothing we can do." He didn't take photos, didn't file a report. "Buy some security cameras," he said, and drove away. By noon, the paint had dried into the wood grain. I scrubbed until my arms ached, until my incision throbbed, while neighbours stood in their yards whispering, watching, but not helping. 2 weeks later, we had our first formal hearing about Richard's medical condition. The NICU doctor took the stand, white coat crisp, voice calm but carrying steel. He walked the judge through the records page by page. Richard's chart was a battlefield. Brain bleeds from oxygen loss. a body broken before it had a chance. The doctor explained how the 43-minute delay, while Donald argued over custody, had directly caused my baby to code twice on the operating table. He didn't speculate. He pointed. Time stamps, orders, vital logs, all showing that Dr. Kevin had demanded immediate surgery, and Donald had blocked the door, leaving me to bleed while Richard suffocated inside me. The prosecutor leapt up over and over. Objection, speculation, but the record was merciless. Black and white, a clock ticking down to my son's heart stopping, and as I sat there, every detail replayed in my mind. The cuffs cutting into my wrists, Donald's voice dismissing my screams, the pool of blood spreading beneath me. The truth was finally spoken aloud. But would it matter? Because in that courtroom, I saw it clearly. The system wasn't just broken. It was designed to destroy us. The doctor's testimony ended with a sentence that carved itself into my bones. Richard will need years of therapy for developmental delays, all because 2 cops decided his mother was faking a medical emergency. 3 days later, our lawyer called with news that made me hurl my phone against the wall so hard the case split. Officer Donald, the man who chained me to a bed while I hemorrhaged, had retired. Effective immediately, full pension, full benefits. And just like that, the internal investigation was gone, closed. He's no longer an employee, the department spokesperson announced, smug in their indifference. We don't investigate former officers. No accountability, no justice. The man who nearly killed me and permanently scarred my son would spend the rest of his life cashing retirement checks while I watched Richard struggle to breathe. Our lawyer filed complaints with the state board. Same answer. No jurisdiction over retirees. Meanwhile, CPS doubled down. A thick packet arrived, outlining the hoops we'd have to crawl through before they'd even consider letting Richard come home. Parenting classes, every Tuesday and Thursday, for 12 weeks, 40 miles each way. Random drug tests at our own expense, though no one had ever accused us of drug use. Full psychological evaluations from their approved providers, $800 apiece, insurance not accepted, monthly home inspections unannounced, any hour, any day. The cost alone, over $6,000, might as well have been a ransom note. After lawyer fees, we had maybe $300 left.